So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. For those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Hayden. I'm the Executive Director here at the New Mexico Land Conservancy. I wanted to welcome you to the third event in our spring speaker series here at the Pachesky Conservation Center. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us and what we do, we are a statewide land trust whose mission is pretty simple. We help people conserve the land they love. We also were blessed with this great facility here, the Pachesky Conservation Center. We've really tried to elevate as a regional hub for environmental education, stewardship, and land protection. So this is the third event in that series, and we're very thankful tonight to have Kaitlin Haase from the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Kaitlin is the Southwest Pollinator Conservation Specialist, where she works on conserving resilient and connected communities of pollinator habitat for the benefit of all species, not just those that pollinate. And as we'll talk about, pollinators are so integral to all of our ecosystems. And tonight's talk is particularly interesting for us here at the Pachesky Center because she is going to be doing work right outside our back door to establish one of her pollinator kits. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kaitlin Haase.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. So very excited to be here tonight and share the conservation work that I do here in New Mexico, how you can get involved, and all the other great partners we have doing amazing conservation work to build habitat for pollinators and other wildlife species. So I'll jump right in. First, I like to start with thanking our supporters. Is anyone a member here? Oh, nice, thank you. So we're supported by members, a lot of grants, some private foundations, but our Xerces Society members are really key to the work that we do. So we want to say thank you to them. And then in New Mexico, our work is funded by the Carol Petrie Foundation, a private family foundation that does amazing wildlife conservation work, animal welfare work. So thank you to them. And if you're not familiar with the Xerces Society, does everyone here know who we are? Okay, a couple people know. So we're an international nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation of invertebrate wildlife and their habitats. So that includes all kinds of animals that don't have a backbone. So mostly insects. We work on a lot of bees, a lot of butterflies, dragonflies, stoneflies, but also some things like freshwater mussels and rare snails. Most of that works in the Pacific Northwest, but we work on all of those wildlife species that don't have a backbone. And if you don't know what Xerces, why are we named Xerces? We're named after this blue butterfly over here. That was the Xerces blue butterfly. It was a butterfly species found in the San Francisco Bay Area. And with the development of that area, the destruction of its habitat, it lived in sand dunes along the Bay Area. It's the first insect we know to have gone extinct in North America due to human impacts. So, in naming ourselves after this butterfly, we're honoring it and dedicating the rest of our work to prevent any other losses of invertebrate species. And we do this in a variety of ways. We have multiple teams. We have a pollinator team that works on agricultural biodiversity to help farmers and producers create habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects that help control pest populations. So win-win for farmers. We also have an endangered species team that works on understanding what species are rare. We really don't have a lot of data on most insects and other invertebrates, so just collecting that baseline data of where insects are, what are their populations at. That's what a lot of the endangered species team does. They just launched a New Mexico Bumblebee Atlas for New Mexico. So if you want to do some community science work and catch bumblebees, I can tell you more about that. We also have a pesticide reduction team that works on understanding where pesticides are and how we can teach people to reduce or even eliminate pesticides and managing pests across many different landscapes. My colleague, Jacqueline Bunrostro, she's actually here in town. She's our a pesticide program specialist, and we're giving a training for Albuquerque park staff tomorrow to teach them how to reduce pest, practice integrated pest management, and yeah, it's really exciting that we have a small but mighty pesticide team, and sometimes they get to make it to New Mexico to support us. So we do this work in a variety of ways. We're restoring habitat. That's what I'm going to talk a lot about today with our Pollinator Habitat Kit program. As I mentioned, we do a lot of research, just baseline on insects, pesticides, all different kinds of things. We do lots of education and outreach, especially with the help of our partners. And then we do some advocacy and policy work, mostly at the state level, but also municipals, HOAs, across all different kinds of landscapes and communities. And you may, if you're here, you probably care and are excited to hear about why conservation of insects is important. But most conservation organizations are focused on the big, charismatic birds and mammals. But invertebrates, they don't get a lot of attention often. They're definitely growing in the attention that they get, but they're really critical to the function of our planet. And that is why we focus on invertebrates as a conservation taxa to prioritize. They're really important for pollination, of course. That's one that gets a lot of attention, but they're really important for pest control. Only about 2% of insect species are considered economic pests. The vast majority of them are actually helping control those pests by eating them, parasitizing them. Spiders, wasps, all those things are eating pest species. They're also important food for other wildlife. Most bird species eat insects. Lots of other wildlife eat insects. They're important to soil health, nutrient cycling, and water and soil, and even moving plant seeds around. They're really essential for maintaining a healthy ecosystem at many different levels in many different ways. And we're going to focus on pollinators tonight. I'm a pollinator conservation specialist, so makes sense. So pollinators are really essential because most of our plants, more than 85% of all flowering plants, require an animal to move their pollen to reproduce and set seed and make fruits. So there are some things that are wind pollinated, a lot of grasses, some different trees. They make lots of lightweight pollen and it blows in the air. That's what gives you allergies. But most plants create denser, nutrient-rich pollen that insects are interested in. So most plants do that. 85% are making pollen and nectar to attract those pollinators to help them reproduce. And this is important because we eat plants. Over 35% of global crop production relies on animal pollination. So we'd like to say 1 in every 3 bites of food is thanks to a pollinator. This includes things like apples, berries, avocados, squash, almonds, coffee, chocolate, those are really important things. Animals are required for those to reproduce and make seeds and fruits. And then, of course, beyond us, these fruits and seeds from plants are a major part of the diet of most other wildlife species. So the wild plants producing all of this food for other wildlife is usually dependent on animal pollinators. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of pollinators, particularly caterpillars of butterflies and moths, are such a huge base of the food chain for many birds, bears, fish, you name it. Most wildlife are eating insects at some point in their life. And you're probably aware there's a lot on this slide, but just takeaway is that there's decline of insects. You may have heard of the insect apocalypse. There's lots of declines across different taxa across the globe. So butterflies, we're seeing major declines. Bees, fireflies, we have fireflies in New Mexico. They're in decline. Dragonflies, stoneflies. And we don't have, perfect data to say exactly what species are declining and where. But we know enough to know that this is a global phenomenon and we can do something about it. So just to highlight one example study that our colleagues worked on um, is this butterfly decline research across the United States that looked at butterfly populations in 2000 compared to 2020, so a 20-year difference across the entire US. Across the entire US, we're seeing about a 22% decline in total butterfly um, abundance. So for every 5 butterflies you would have seen like 26 years ago at this point, in 2020, where you would only see about 4. And that's even worse when you break it down into regions in the Southwest. It's an even steeper decline, and I'll get into the reasons why that is. The main reasons are habitat loss. So the destruction of habitat where these insects live, the loss of their food, the loss of their places to shelter. This is at all scales, right? Development in urban spaces, agricultural conversion of natural lands. Um, this all contributes to habitat loss. Then is pesticide use. So pesticides also at almost all scales. This includes agricultural use to urban use, and includes not just insecticides, but also herbicides. Herbicides can have an impact on the health of pollinators, but really the bigger threat is broad herbicide application reduces the plants that they depend on. So kind of a habitat loss connection there. Diseases and pathogens. So we're experiencing a lot of transfer from managed honeybee colonies. Their diseases and pathogens that they have can be transferred to native pollinators. So that's one other major concern. And finally, climate change. So this kind of plays into that habitat loss, plant communities are shifting, phenology is shifting. So the timing of when a flower might be blooming versus when its pollinator might emerge, that is really starting to shift and may create a major disconnect between these mutualisms of species. But we can do lots of things, and we're going to talk about all the habitat work that we can do and how we can address these declines by conserving and creating habitat, reducing our reliance on pesticides, reducing risk for managed species, and then, of course, choosing climate smart solutions. It's a bigger level thing, but it's something we can all try to work into our habitat that we're building. So when we're thinking about how to make habitat for a pollinator, say you want to create a pollinator garden, a pollinator meadow, you want to start by understanding the lives of pollinators and what they need to complete their life cycle. And to really understand this, let's break down who the pollinators are and what their lives look like. So the main group of pollinators, I'm going into the insects mostly because that's what we specialize in at Xerces. But of course, we have some vertebrate pollinators like hummingbirds, some bats are pollinators. But the main insect pollinators that do the really heavy lifting of most pollination of wild plants and crop plants are bees, butterflies, moths. Those are probably like, yeah, those are pollinators, recognizable. But there's also a few other groups of insects that you might not immediately think of as a pollinator. So wasps are important pollinators. So are beetles and flies. A lot of these are specialists, like not all beetles are pollinators, but there's a significant set of beetles that are pollinators. And most all of these insects are visiting flowers to drink nectar. So they're drinking nectar as an adult flying insect to fuel themselves. But out of all these pollinators, there's one that's the best. You might know it. It's the bees. Bees are the best pollinators for a couple reasons, and particularly the female bees. Female bees are actively collecting pollen to feed their larvae. So pollen is really protein dense, and larvae need a lot of protein to do the transformation into an adult. So female bees have like body features that help them collect pollen. Like they'll have lots of hairs on their abdomen or on their legs to collect lots of pollen to take back to the nest to feed their kids. And also, one thing that makes them really good at pollination is once they know their way around one species of flower, they like to go to that same species over and over again. So instead of going to one species and then a different species, they're not transferring in that direction, they're not transferring, the actual genetic material of the pollen to the right plant. But since they're going to the same one in a foraging trip with the right pollen to the right species, they're really, really good at pollination. And when people think of bees, you usually think of the honey bee, right? You think of queens and honey in a hive, but bees are wildly diverse. So here's an example of a couple bees that you can see in New Mexico. A giant carpenter bee. You can see most usually like a little further south in Albuquerque. I keep hearing they're making their way north with climate change. But they're really massive bees. And then we have tiny little bees like a fairy bee that are doing the same thing. They're collecting pollen to take back to the nest to feed their babies. But they do have very different appearances and behaviors, life histories than the honeybee that we're all more familiar with. So here's just a pie chart of some of those different bees. This is, you're probably familiar with bumblebees. We have about 50 species in the US, and the honeybee is one species, the European honeybee. But in the US, we have over 3,600 species of bees and over 1,100 species in New Mexico alone. So New Mexico hosts at least a third or a quarter of all of our bee species in the US. So we're really diverse here. And yeah, one thing that people don't realize with a lot of bees is that most of them are solitary. They are not in a hive with lots of workers. That's really just distinct to bumblebees and honeybees. Most are solitary, creating a nest all on their own. And those nests look like mostly in the ground. So 70% of our native bees um, tunnel down directly into the soil. They lay their eggs in little cells, and then they take the pollen back to those cells. And most of our bees over winter are dormant underground in the soil. Some bees nest in tunnels and like in hollow stems and like beetle boring holes in wood. You may have seen them in like around my door frame on my house. I have like old screw holes that bees nest in around the door frame. So you can see them in different kinds of cavities like that. That's about 30% of our native bees. And then a small percent or 1% of bumblebees nest in bigger cavities, mostly rodent burrows. Those are social cavity nesting bees. So they'll build a nest in a rodent burrow in one year. But unlike honeybees, they're on an annual basis. So that colony will just last a year, and then a new queen will find a new place to nest the next year. And bees are kind of split into two categories in what food they prefer. So there's generalist pollinators. So bumblebees, honeybees that are active most of the growing season, they can't be picky. They have to forage whatever pollen is around, right? Or in bees that are active through multiple seasons, they need to take advantage of whatever they can get. Um, so they'll collect pollen from any kind of flower. But we have a lot of specialist bees in New Mexico. Almost half of our bee species are specialist, and that they only collect pollen to take back to the nest from either one plant family or just one plant genus. So here's a few examples of those specialist bees. So we have a squash bee on the far left. Next is a sunflower bee, only collecting pollen just from the sunflower genus, maybe from olive Asteraceae. That's a huge, huge family, the aster family that supports a lot of specialist bees. There's even cactus bees, the next one, that only collect pollen or only active during the cactus bloom period of the year. We have willow bees. So those are usually more in riparian areas, specialized to those places. We have globe mallow bees. There's lots of globe mallow on the landscape, so they usually have a good source of food. Um, and then things like Zelia is another specialist bee. This is a fairy bee, Perdita, that specializes on those. So lots and lots of examples of if you're going to build habitat for lots of diversity, you got to include all these specialist bees and their host plants. And I do highlight bees a lot. I do want to share a bit about the other pollinators and how they are important too. So butterflies and moths are really important pollinators for a couple reasons. They're really diverse in New Mexico. We have over 350 butterfly species throughout New Mexico. And moths, we don't quite know how many there are. They're just extremely diverse and understudied. But there's likely like 3,000 species for usually about every one butterfly species. There's probably 9 moth species in an area. Um, and then pollination by butterflies and moths is a little different from bees in that bees are foraging around a nest. So that mama bee is collecting near her nest. She doesn't typically fly very far unless she's a really big bumblebee. They can fly a mile or two from their nest. But most of it is in a really localized area. Whereas butterflies and moths, they're typically more mobile. They're moving further distances. Some species stay in very small areas, but things like monarch butterflies are international travelers. So we have more genetic movement of pollen from butterflies and moths because they move much greater distances. So they're really important to gene flow between plant populations. And what butterfly and moth life histories look like. Um, not quite as similar as a bee, but similar in that caterpillars, the larva of a butterfly or moth, is eating a host plant. So they're eating the vegetation. Some of those specialist bees, they're eating the pollen, so just a very particular part of the plant. Whereas the caterpillars eat the vegetation, the leaves, the stems, sometimes the flowers. They're laid as an egg on the host plant. They grow as caterpillars, and then they pupate, typically on a different plant or nearby. And then once that pupa develops, they metamorph into an adult, and that is the pollinating, nectar drinking, flying version of the butterfly or moth. And as I mentioned, the specialist, this great example here, of course, is the monarch butterfly. You plant the milkweed because the caterpillars eat it. The flowers are still great. They're very important nectar sources. But it's funny, I've had family reach out to me and ask, like, what's eating my milkweed? Should I get rid of it? I'm like, no, That's why you planted it. You want them on our caterpillars to eat it. So yes, having those host plants and the nectar plants for the adult is really important. And just to highlight a few different kinds of beetles, we know a little bit less about all their different life histories, but they also do complete metamorphosis like bees and butterflies. They lay an egg, the egg hatches into a larva, they pupate into an adult. So they have a similar life cycle where things like uh, lady beetles are eating aphids at both stages of their life. And these beetles, some of them are predators in their larva stage, some are herbivores, but as adults, these are visiting flowers to eat nectar. Some are pollen eaters too, and moving pollen around from flower to flower. Next are our pollinating flies. One interesting thing about a lot of our pollinating flies is that many of them are parasitoids. So they are laying their eggs in the nest of other insects, often a lot of bees even. So usually if you see something like this uh, bombyllid bee fly, this really fuzzy bee, it means you have a good bee population because it's supporting a parasite of bee nest. So these parasitic species, some people are like, oh, I don't want them, but they're just a natural part of the ecosystem and they are an indication that populations are doing well. Tachinid flies are also a parasitoid of other insect species. So really these flies are really important pollinators in different, usually at higher elevations. They're really good pollinators where bees are a little slower flyers in those cold environments. Flies can do a little bit better and take over most pollination. And then we have pollinating wasp. So pollinating wasp, lots of our wasp species are drinking nectar, and the wasp themselves, they're very closely related to bees, but the thing that differentiates them is that they are predators and parasitoids, and that's what they feed their babies. They are catching other insects. That's why you have wasp visiting you when you're having a picnic and they're trying to take a bit of hamburger or any kind of meat. They want to take it back to their nest and feed to their larva. So that's what separates a bee from a wasp is that their kids eat different things. One's a vegetarian, one's a carnivore. So lots of them are visiting flowers and drinking nectar and helping pollinate and keep a lot of other insect populations in check because they're eating lots and lots of grasshoppers, other species that can get a little out of check if there's not a good predator population around. So when we're thinking about that addressing pollinator declines and building pollinator habitat, creating pollinator habitat, it's important to think about what we just learned about in the lives of these different insect species. So the first thing they need is food. They need flowers that provide nectar and pollen and leaves for those caterpillars to eat. So host plants for butterflies and moths, and lots of flowers that will support uh, the nectar and pollen needs of these insects. Next, they need shelter. So all of these insects go dormant in winter, so they need a space to do that safely. And usually any kind of major leaf litter, plant litter, diversified plant structures are really essential to providing that shelter. And then finally, they need protection. So you can make all this habitat, which is great, but if it's exposed to pesticides or severe light pollution, this can really impact the value of that habitat to pollinators. So when we're talking about that habitat food, It's not just the wildflowers, it's those host plants too, right, for caterpillars to eat. It blooms across all seasons. So these insects are active at different times of year. There are spring bees and butterflies. There are summer bees and butterflies, fall bees and butterflies. They have all evolved either to be active throughout multiple seasons. Some are evolved to only be active for about 6 to 8 weeks out of the year during a particular plant bloom. So you want to ensure you don't have gaps in that growing season where bumblebees don't have food or a specialist bee doesn't have food. And of course, a diversity of native species. So all of our native bees and butterflies and other insects have evolved with our native flora here. So we want to ensure we're including native species that are matched to the pollinator populations and matched to our climate that we're living in. And then shelter, this looks like do not disturb areas, brush and rock piles, um, having plant litter, leaves, logs, any kind of shrubby shelter where insects can spend the winter and not be eaten and be protected from extreme temperatures. So one thing like you could do to help maintain like a higher cover of this plant litters, like if there's mowing along roadsides, like just mowing it higher and mowing it when the plants aren't in bloom and at least letting them go to seed if that's a desirable plant. And oops. Next is protection. So, light pollution is a major issue for many insects. Almost about 60% of insect species are nocturnal or at least partly nocturnal. So artificial light at night can really impact their behavior, their activity, their ability to evade predators. So reducing light pollution is going to have many benefits beyond protecting insects. It protects birds. It gives us a view of the night sky. It's better for our sleeping health. Lots of benefits to reducing light pollution. We also need to manage invasive species. So the plants that these pollinators depend on, managing other invasive plants that will outcompete those natives is really important. But we also need to do this while being mindful about the impacts of herbicides and other pesticides and practice integrated pest management. So yeah, that's kind of the overview of what we can do generally to conserve pollinators. And I'm going to move into more of a case study of how Xerces is working to remove the barriers of pollinator habitat creation. So through the Pollinator Habitat Kit program, we're helping people get the resources they need to provide all the habitat and making sure that habitat is high quality for many species too. So, if you're thinking about starting a pollinator garden, you might think, okay, I'll just Google how to find a pollinator plant. What do I plant? And if you do that, you will get so many results. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of resources on protecting pollinators, but the right way to do it is to select things that are native. They'll support local pollinators. They're going to be adapted to your climate. You want a diversity of things that will bloom from spring to fall. Plants, when you do purchase them, they can be contaminated with pesticides. So understanding if what you're getting is contaminated. Is it even available? Can you find it? And is it affordable? Sometimes this is quite a stretch for some people to be able to afford these plants. So finding those plants can be a real barrier. And that is where the Pollinator Habitat Kit program comes in. I don't know why my photos aren't showing up on these two slides, but hopefully they will. Other photos will show the picture. But just to share what the Habitat Kit program is it provides climate smart native pollinator plants to project partners who are willing to provide the time, labor, and land to develop habitats that support pollinators. So what that looks like is our programs initially started in California in 2019. So Californians were thinking about how do we support the monarch butterfly, and we had lots of partners that were interested in creating habitat, but they could not find the right milkweed or the right milkweed at the right time that they needed to plant. So what we did was create a whole kit program providing milkweed, but also many other nectar and other host plants for other declining butterflies and bee species. And we've been growing since. So currently there are 6 regions active throughout the US. And each region has a slightly different focus, but the main goal is to provide high quality, permanent habitat for pollinators. So this looks like, that diversity of native species that are adapted to the local region you're growing in and has a lot of diversity. So, what we're doing to create that is providing these plants at no cost to our partners. We're curating native plants and having a great diversity of them. And we're also providing support to our Habitat Kit partners, providing technical guidance, when to plant, how to support and maintain these habitats over time. And of course, the partners in exchange provide a lot. They're providing a lot of time, a lot of labor. But the water, especially in New Mexico, is an important resource and of that land and location for habitat creation. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to my photos in this part of the series. But as I mentioned, that plant selection piece is really critical because native plant industry is really starting to grow. There's a lot more interest. Consumers are demanding it more, but it is still lagging behind the demand. So by offering, we contract with native plant nurseries to grow more pollinator plants and a particular selection of plants that will support many different species to the area. And we're offering different kit types. So, not every site is the same, ensuring we're having some diversity for your water availability, what your soil looks like. Being able to cater the kit to a site is really important as well. And for Santa Fe, we have had the Santa Fe Pollinator Trail initiative where we offer these pollinator kits to Santa Fe residences, private home gardens, and other public spaces in support of building climate resilient, connected urban habitat throughout the city. And these look like, visualize for me, a tray of plants, 32 individuals, of 8 different perennial species, so 4 of each of one plant species, and in addition, a gallon pot of a shrub that will provide a little bit more shelter habitat, but also blooms as well. And we have 2 different kit types offered for Santa Fe. So for Santa Fe, this will be the 6th year of offering kits. We've celebrated 5 years last year. Since 2021, we've distributed 1,000 kits to residences and public spaces of totaling 33,000 plants. So quite a big effort across many different households, public spaces, our libraries, our schools. Many of those folks are participating. So over 700 partners in these residential and public spaces. So that has been a really great success in connecting habitats across the city. There's so much development in Santa Fe, and our open spaces, natural areas have been displaced, right? So in refilling these gaps with pollinator habitat, we're helping build connectivity across the landscape. And then more recently, we have expanded this kit program to a bigger audience. The past couple of years, we've offered our Northern New Mexico Pollinator Habitat Restoration Kits, which are larger kits for larger properties. This is open to working lands, farms and ranches, public spaces, schools, conservation properties, tribal lands, and wildfire impacted properties. And these kits are a bit bigger. They're 98 plugs, so it's quite a commitment to plant all of those. 7 species, 14 of each, and we have an upland kit and a riparian kit available. And there's supposed to be a map here of our habitat kits across the landscape. We have them all the way south to Belen. A farmer there, a farmer in Shiprock has planted one of these kits, and then an art center in Raton. And then all throughout that northern New Mexico area, we have kit partners. And since 2024, we've distributed 50 of those for a total of almost 5,000 plants, and we have 30 of those kits available this year. And I just want to highlight a few of our partners because we really couldn't do this work without all of the partners that are involved. So Santa Ana Native Plant Nursery is our contract grow business that provides our plants, and we work with from the beginning of the year to the end of the year to collect seed, develop the plant list for the habitat kits, and get them out to people that want to grow the plants. So it's Pueblo owned and operated. It is wholesale. They used to have a garden center that was retail, but that went under during COVID. But for bigger wholesale projects, they work with many different restoration reclamation groups. They are really dedicated to growing pesticide free, which is pretty hard to find in the plant world. So really great that they're dedicated to that. And most of the plants are grown mostly from locally collected seed. And Mike Halverson, the manager of the nursery, he's very great about coming to our kit distribution and educating people about the plants that they're getting and providing technical guidance about where to plant them, what to expect when you're planting all these different species. Another partner I want to highlight is the Santa Fe Master Gardeners and their demonstration gardens. So if you go to the Santa Fe County Fairgrounds, the extension office is there, and they have multiple demonstration gardens. And they have planted our Santa Fe specific kits, our low water and low to medium water kits in those gardens. So giving an example of what those species look like in different settings, in like a more manicured garden and a more wild garden, and then in a full pollinator meadow. So you can see all of these examples of and how to do different mulching techniques, how to collect rainwater. There's lots of great examples of how you can build these kits into your landscape. And of course, we have this incredible volunteer and education exchange. I could not do this program without the Master Gardener support and volunteer hours they provide. They help me sort the kits, all the species into each kit, and help distribute them at the fairgrounds. So, and in exchange, I offer lots of education and trainings where the Master Gardeners can learn more about native pollinators and native plants. And the other one I want to highlight is our Los Lunas Ag Science Center partner. So they planted an upland pollinator habitat restoration kit last year. So it's a conventional ag space that's doing lots of research and data collection on different sustainable and typical farming, mostly alfalfa growing, but lots of examples of chili in the Los Lunas area. And this is kind of that middle Rio Grande location. So there's lots of great outreach potential there because we have New Mexico State University staff and USGS, US Geologic Service. They have a whole native plant, native seed program there. And this, we curated the kit to be more specific to this hotter site. It's pretty hot in Los Lunas. And also finding species that will be compatible with the ag production and fields there. Um, and then the last partner I want to highlight is the New Mexico Land Conservancy, future partner. So we're planting an upland restoration habitat kit just behind the Pacheski Center Conservation Center here. We'll use it as a demonstration site to educate about restoration of habitat for pollinators. And just FYI, we are looking for volunteers. We'll have dates set in July and August to do some site prep, some irrigation prep, some fencing prep to keep the critters out. And of course, planting day. Everyone wants to be there on planting day. So if you're interested and eligible, not all properties are eligible, unfortunately, but if you want to become a kit partner, our proposals for the 2026 kits are open until the end of June, and the plants are distributed in late August. So you'll hear if you're selected in early July, and then get the plants in late August. There's my email if you want to learn more, the website. If you just search Santa Fe pollinator kits or New Mexico pollinator kits, you'll find it pretty easily. Here's a slide of some clearly borders of photos that I put in, but it did not work. But we have lots of resources at xerces.org. We have publications. There's some publications here if you want to learn more. We have a great YouTube channel with lots of recorded webinars, a podcast called Bug Banter. If you want to hear some nerds talk about bugs, that's always a good time. And then with that, I'll say thank you and take any questions you might have.
Is alfalfa a pollinator friendly plant?
Oh, good question. So there is, Fabaceae. It's in the Fabaceae family. It's a legume, and legumes are one of the most valuable plants to a lot of specialists. Caterpillars eat it. There's specialist bees. It's a great flower for a lot of species. The problem with alfalfa is it grows a bit aggressively in certain conditions, and it can really take over any kind of manicured garden. I wouldn't say it's the worst invasive plant, but it's definitely not desirable in most situations. Like I would rather people plant um, a native clover, so something like white prairie clover, purple prairie clover, anything in the Dahlia genus. That is preferred because there's definitely not a lack of alfalfa on the landscape. Um, and yeah, it's one of those things like sweet clover as well, very attractive to a lot of pollinators, but it's really an invasive species that can outcompete and reduce diversity of native plants. So and that's part of why these plants are so successful is because pollinators love them. So they really help build the seed bank. The pollinators contribute to that because they're irresistible for a lot of pollinators. And yeah, when people are like managing a space that's really dominated by a pollinator attractive invasive species, we request that they kind of do it in phases so you don't totally wipe out a pollinator resource. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question about alfalfa. Yeah. Oh, Oh, good question. I should probably repeat this so people online can hear. So the question was, how long should people water gardens for these habitat kits, I'm assuming. So for our Santa Fe low water kit, all of the kits need like at least a couple years of reliable watering, especially through summer. Um, to get established because they're little babies going in the ground. If you just put them in the ground, they're not going to make it. They need water to start growing their roots. But most species are really drought tolerant and very adapted to our dry climate. It wouldn't hurt to keep watering them just to help boost bloom time. Things are getting hotter and drier, so just helping them establish. And a lot of these plants will reseed even. So once they get established, you'll probably have some volunteers of the same species later that grow on their own and don't need irrigation. So yeah, at least a couple years. Some of the plants in our low to medium water kit, we have like showy milkweed and bee balm in there, and they need kind of regular watering for a few years. And then our riparian kit is intended to be in wet soils and wet places. So at least watering them for 2 growing seasons is ideal. Watering through winter is great too. Susan. Yeah.
So would you say that once a week?
Oh, yeah. Good question. So exactly how frequently? Once a week. In summer and the heat of summer, definitely, especially the first year. I'm a terrible waterer. Like I really stress my plants out because I'm just uh neglectful. And sometimes once a week is plenty. If it's extremely hot, twice a week. But usually it's only twice a week for maybe like a month out of the year. Whereas once a week, once it starts getting dry and warm in spring, you can probably take a little bit of a break during monsoons and water less frequently. It is, something you kind of have to adjust and just pay attention to. Like, I have some things in containers. Some of the plants do well in containers, so that needs more watering. And they'll tell you, they'll look sad, and you'll be like, "Oh, it's time. I should water you." But yeah, definitely, it varies depending on how hot it is, what time of year it is. But I would say once a week is definitely on the maximum side of how often to water. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a pollinator garden at the Santa Fe Botanical Garden?
Yes. So question was, is there a pollinator garden at the Santa Fe Botanical Garden? Yes. I would argue almost the entire garden is a pollinator garden because they are so dedicated to native plants throughout most of the entire garden. So they have our habitat kits there. So I think they're going to be planning one of the restoration kits. They definitely have the Santa Fe kits there. And they have just an incredible diversity of really fun natives that you don't see everywhere. So they're a really great pollinator garden example in the city. Any questions online?
Nothing
No.
online. So yeah, how about another round of applause for Kaitlin?
You guys.
Yeah, so if you are interested in hearing more about the pollinator kits or want to get involved volunteering to help plant or prepare, either here at the Buchesky Center or elsewhere, please do contact Kaitlin. I will say your pictures looked beautiful on the online presentation. So if you're yeah, so if you're really curious and want to see what they look like, we'll have that posted on our YouTube channel probably sometime in the next week.
Huh,
So
what a
yeah,
mystery.
yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Do a city, but you don't do anything in the county.
No, I know El Dorado's outside of our focus area. Um, but we do offer them to public spaces in the county. So if it's a public space in the county, then we do offer the habitat kits. So yeah. Yes. Okay.
Your habitat kits, like food or food bearing for eating?
Yeah, let's see. In the Santa Fe kits, not as many. We have three-leaf sumac, which you can use berries for a very tart lemonade kind of thing. Um, Most of them are, yeah, not great to eat. Some are even a little toxic. Um, but in the uh, riparian habitat kit in particular, there's woods rose, rose hips, um, uh, golden currant. Yeah, definitely a couple examples of some things you can eat and harvest. Yeah, yeah. Susan, did you have another question? Or Susan?
No, it's.
Okay. We'll chat. All right. Thank you.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank you all again for joining us for this third installment of our Spring Speaker Series. This is the last one in this series, but we are having more events on the horizon. So we just found out earlier today that we'll be co-hosting an event here with the Leopold Writing Center. They have a writing workshop and residency program where they have an author in residence either at Aldo Leopold's old home in Tres Piedras, or I think this one is actually in the Galisteo Basin this year. And they'll be coming to give a presentation about their writing sometime in late July, so stay tuned for that. And then we'll be having our fall speaker series, probably starting in October, where we hope to kind of present some of the results of a wildlife survey that we're currently conducting here at the Pachesky Center, a vegetation inventory, and then hopefully maybe
Yeah.
see how the pollinator kit is doing. So stay tuned for that. Sign up to our mailing list, um, or just come stop by. So
Yes.
On the supply of non-chemically damaged seeds and plants,
Mhm.
do you have a list of places we can get them?
Yeah, we're like trying to build an online database that's you know, more of a like native plant and seed supplier, and then there will be some pesticide information there, but it requires um, some uh activity from the nursery to get it in there, and most are just too busy to add it. So what we recommend people do is ask questions, ask a lot of questions. If you can find the grower and determine what they used, we have resources online to show like how long lived that pesticide might be, how toxic it is to different insects. So understanding if it was treated with something on the more or less risky scale versus more risky scale can be informative. But yeah, my biggest advice is to ask questions. And most growers, especially bigger ones that are sourcing from other places, they won't have that information. So that's not super helpful, but and then I'll say with seeds, most like seed coated insecticide treated seeds is mostly grain crops, corn, soybeans. It's not that big of a concern with native plant species. So yeah, yeah.
And is the fact that they're moving with truckloads of these hives of bees across the United States,
Mhm.
is that partly our problem that we're having such infestation of diseases?
Yeah, definitely. Mismanagement of managed pollinators definitely contributes to pest and pathogen presence in our native bees. So, um, ensuring that those bees are quarantined or treated properly before being introduced into, especially a wild area, because usually they're just moved from um, different agricultural fields at different times of year when that crop is in bloom. But at the off season, they're usually stored on like public lands where they can be exposing a lot of our native bee species. So that's management policy, those all tie into addressing that. Yeah, there's a couple organizations that are working on that. And yeah, it's mostly finding, I mean, this is a big change, but you know, shifting away from industrial ag so we don't need to rely on these giant honeybee colonies being moved around the country is really the solution. But making that change is going to be pretty difficult, but there's lots of people working on creating a more diversified ag system. So hopefully we'll keep moving in that direction.
Well, thanks again, Kaitlin.
Thank you.